Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Hairymuppet. Welcome back to some more Factorio Space Age, and we are on the second planet. Technically the third planet, but it's the second new planet in the system. So this is the same order that I filled in the planets. I went to Volcanus first, and then I went to Fulgora, and of course I left Gleba last. It's a fairly good way to do it. In the end, Fulgora does give you some good stuff, which is nice for your Megabase. And yes, once you get the Fulgora down, you can start building the EM plant. There's a lot of good things you can get. I wouldn't say it's as important to get early on as Volcanus is, because those big mining drills and the foundries really do help your Megabase out a lot back on Nowvis, and you could even go as far as to build all of the Nowvis science on Volcanus if you really want to. Fulgora is not as useful. You get some EM plants, which are great for making all the different circuits, and you get some exoskeletons, the mech armor, which allows you to fly, and better roboports and all that other sort of stuff, but none of that stuff is really super urgent for building a Megabase. So, whereas on the other hand with Gleba, where do you get with Gleba? On Gleba you do have the biolabs with the 50% science drain, so you may want to go for those before Fulgora if you really want those biolabs. And of course you've got belt stacking and a whole bunch of other things. You got prod module 3s from Gleba, which is really, really nice. So yeah, whereas Fulgora, where is Fulgora? I'm just looking for the research. Here it is. You pretty much got the recycler, which is kind of nice, and the EM plant, which is kind of nice, and the quality, which is really not. It's kind of useful, but anyway. We're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's talk about Fulgora. So we'll start off with the basics. What do you need to know when you land? First of all, there is a day-night cycle. At night, there is lightning everywhere. And if you are standing outside of an area that is protected by lightning towers, you will have this symbol. And this symbol means that you will get struck by lightning. You can survive one hit. You can sort of survive 2 hits depending on how much armor you have. But 3 hits and you're almost certainly dead. Maybe if you equip some shields, you probably last a little bit longer, but yeah. You can die quite quickly when you get struck by lightning, which obviously, as we said, only happens at night. But the good thing about lightning is it is going to be your power supply for a very, very long time. So, yeah, basically what you do is you start off with these little lightning rods. I like to build a grid of substations and lightning rods and just do a massive grid of these and just build everything inside them. And that takes care of pretty much protecting your base. And if you build enough accumulators, it also takes care of your electrical supply, because these only get struck by lightning at night, but they do generate a buttload of power. You can see our normal fusion grid is about 6 gigawatts. Right now we have a total of 1.8 terawatts. So that is all from these towers, the lightning collectors, the lightning rods. So obviously to make use of that electricity, you have to have accumulators. So when I first started off, this entire island was covered in accumulators, except for the actual base which did stuff. Now, I've since got rid of those accumulators because I got fusion set up, so I don't really need them anymore, and they were taking up a buttload of space. But when you first go to Fulgora, bring lots of accumulators, because you will definitely need them. So once you've got some lightning rods set up around your substations, you'll get into the actual meat of Fulgora, the actual science. And there are only 2 resources on this planet. The first is heavy oil, which you basically pump out. Like the ocean is heavy oil. So whenever you need it, you just pump it out using a water pump. and boom, heavy oil. So that's the least interesting resource, but you do need it every now and then. And the other one is scrap. Now, in terms of these islands, you'll notice there's kind of a pattern to these islands. There's small islands and there's big islands. The big islands give you space to build stuff, and they typically have either very little scrap or no scrap. For example, this one only has 632,000. Then you have the tiny islands, and the tiny islands have millions upon millions upon millions of scrap. So typically what you'll do is you'll set up a base on one of the bigger islands with a bit of scrap on it. You will mine through that scrap, and eventually you will run out, and then you will build a little train network to go over to one of the smaller islands where there's millions of scrap, and you'll load up on a train and you'll send it back. And these oceans, this will be one of the first places that you'll start using the rail supports, because you need it for Volcanus, for the Megabase, but you don't need it for the initial science. For Fulgora, you kind of do, because your scrap will run out really quickly. So it's important to note that there is two different types of water over here. There's the shallow ocean as the deep ocean. You can always put these rail supports on the shallow ocean. To put them on the deep ocean, you need a little bit of research, which is rail support foundations. Yeah. So you can only do this after you start getting some tech science, some electromagnetic science packs. So yeah, before that, if you want to build rails, you're going to have to do it in very convoluted ways that are very annoying. But once you get the foundation on the deep ocean parts, you can start to make rail networks that look a lot nicer and are a lot simpler. So yes. Now we get to the really complicated part, and that is the scrap. So you get this new building called a recycler. Now the recycler has two main things it could do. First of all, you chuck in scrap and it gives you one of 12 different items. And it's all percentage based, so you can kind of work around the ratio. There's a little bit of randomness, but over enough time the randomness sort of gets filtered out. So you can design around that percentage chance, and that's exactly what I've done with my Megabase, kind of, although my Megabase is quite flexible, so it deals with randomness quite well. But anyway, that's the first job of the recycler. It takes in scrap, and if you go to this recipe, scrap recycling, you can actually see the percentages ahead of time. So all the percentages on that list add up to 60%. So there's a 40% chance that the scrap just disappears and doesn't give you anything. However, you can also increase the productivity. For example, my productivity is 210%, which I got up to that point exactly to get my, because my Megabase required 210% to run flawlessly, which is what I did. And that research is in here somewhere. I can't remember exactly. Here it is. Scrap recycling productivity. So that is infinite research, but it only applies to the scrap inside the recycler. So, as you can see, we've got a huge belt of random crap that the recycler splits out. So it's basically, if you hate sushi belts, that is basically just your worst nightmare come true. So most of the base is going to be separating out each of these into their separate little sections and figuring out how to do that with logistics. And then figuring out how to manage it. How to manage how the processes work. Now, the most important thing you get out of scrap is the holmium ore, which has a 1% chance. It's the only resource that is native to Fulgora. I say it's only native to Fulgora. You can't get it anywhere else other than from scrap recycling. Everything else you can get from other places, but that's it. Holmium ore you can only get from that. So the way the science pretty much works is you recycle scrap, you keep all of the holmium ore, and you keep as much of the rest of the products as you need to make the science using the holmium ore you've got. And if you've got extra, then you throw it away. And the way you throw it away is also with the recycler. So for example, you chuck some stone in here. It's going to have a 25% chance to return its ingredients, its base ingredients. So if you chuck in, for example, steel, it'll return iron plate. And yeah, so if you look at the description over there, it kind of depends on what item you chuck it in. So if you chuck it in stone, there is no ingredient that makes stone. So what it just does is it returns stone 25% of the time. And because we're losing 75% of the product, that means the recycler works very effectively as kind of a dumping ground. You just, whatever stone you throw in here, it just disappears over time. Now you have to resend this stone back into the system, but as you can see, we've got enough here so that pretty much whatever extra is being sent down the belt, which is not needed for the actual process, gets thrown away. And as we can see here, we are prioritizing receiving the stone from down on this line because we do not want this belt to back up. Okay, if this belt backs up on holmium, that's fine, because holmium is the thing that we're always going to be running low on. So if holmium backs up, then that means we've got enough science, basically, further down the line, so we don't need to worry about it. In which case, everything else can back up, and there's no problem. If anything else backs up, and holmium is empty, and you've backed up on like iron gears or something, that means you need more recyclers to throw away the iron gears. But yeah, after that is pretty much a case of recycling, because you're not just recycling to throw excess items away, you're also recycling to get things you need. For example, the science requires accumulators, which require iron plates. The scrap produces iron gears and steel, so we take both of those items and recycle both of them to get iron plate. And then we send the iron plate off down the line to be made into accumulators. And for example, we also need green circuits and plastic. We don't get either of those, but we do get red circuits and blue circuits. So we have to decide how many of those we're going to recycle to get green circuits and plastic, and how many we're going to throw away. This is kind of an interesting situation, this base. I'll show you the Megabase later on, because the Megabase does it a lot more cleanly, and this is kind of a little bit hacky, but yeah. In terms of that, pretty much you're just making random things. So for example, you need electrolyte, which takes heavy oil and holmium solution and stone, and the holmium solution takes stone and holmium ore, and then holmium plate takes holmium solution. Now, one thing I would greatly recommend is, because holmium is kind of the thing that you'll be running out of most, everything that uses holmium, all the way up to the science, I would put prod modules on. And that will sort of increase the total amount of science you can make from the amount of scrap, and it'll also decrease the amount of recycling you need on other products in order to keep this belt flowing freely, because, yeah. If you don't put prod modules in these, suddenly you're getting less holmium per iron gears, and you have to put a lot more recycling to get rid of all the iron gears, and it turns into a massive pain in the ass. And space on Fulgora is limited. This is one of the bigger islands, and as you can see, we've kind of squeezed in everything. And we had accumulators in every spare spot on this island. And this was just to make 120 SPM. So you'll see what we did for 5k SPM later on, but pretty much once you get holmium, everything else kind of just falls together. Like you got these superconductors, everything that for the science can be made with things you get from scrap or heavy oil that you pump out of the ocean. You need some light oil as well. You crack that using the water that you get from processing the ice that you get from the scrap. So what I usually like to do for this setup is have a little thing like this. I put it in some passive provider chests, which is good because it means that if I had stone in my supply rocket, suddenly that supply rocket doesn't need to supply stone anymore for other miscellaneous processes because it's being provided from the science build because we're just producing so much extra stone. Then I put it out here. I have a priority splitter sending it back down into this kind of loop. And the loop, as we said before, it always prioritizes reading things off the main line. And then it sends it off to this process and this process. And if there's anything extra, it gets sent down here and it basically gets destroyed. So I have these all over the place. I've got one for water right here that does it. I have one for solid fuel right here that does it. And for some of the bigger things like iron gears and iron plate, this one is just destroying iron plate over here. This is excess in case these guys don't work. So it kind of gets that and then it sends it back off into there. This is slowed down a bit because I'm not actually producing science here anymore. The science is all backed up because, of course, the Megabase is providing the science now. But it still does produce some things, like, for example, these super capacitors are sometimes needed. Holmium plate, obviously I send it off planet for various things. The superconductors as well are needed quite a bit. But yeah, dumping is a very major part of this process. And we can see here we've got a special station, and basically I'm not actually sure I should be sending the holmium ore off. I'm just dumping it. Anything that's over 10,000 in the system, I just dump. And it basically just keeps this system running. Maybe I should rethink that. I'm not actually sure why I'm dumping holmium ore. There was probably a good reason for it, so I'm not going to change it now, but yes, I probably am throwing away scrap. There was some sort of product I was making here that wasn't fully dependent on the holmium, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. Okay, we'll ignore it for now. But as you can see, this train just comes down, picks up whatever is in these chests, and these chests all just say if there's more than 10,000 items in the logistics network, throw them in, and then this takes us over to another island, which luckily was close enough to be able to hook up with our power network, and this is just a massive dumping ground. So everything that comes onto this island just gets thrown away. And it's not super awesome because, I mean, it's very hard to get rid of blue circuits. You dump in a blue circuit, you get 5 green circuits and a red circuit coming out. So you're actually increasing the amount of good that you get back from it, which is not great. So yeah. So we've talked about the science. Let's talk about the EM plants, because I got another little build over here, a completely separate build, and this is solely responsible for producing the EM plants because you need so many of them. It's basically just refined concrete, holmium plate, processing unit, and steel plate. You can make all of this from stuff you get from scrap. The refined concrete is a little bit annoying, but you just need poles and steel, and you can make the poles off the iron, and you get the iron from this thing and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I basically just chuck them in here and then send them down to this rocket silo. I also make recyclers on this planet, but they were not too hard to make, so I just made them in this main base. Ignore this base down here. This is my fancy quality base, which I needed some quality superconductors and quality holmium plate. And we got a fusion reactor over here, 6 gigawatts. And I put this in because I didn't want to be powering the Megabase off accumulators and lightning poles. The amount of accumulators I would have needed to keep it running would have just been obscene. So I just said, screw it. Now, the good thing about Fulgora is you get low density structures and blue circuits from recycling the scrap. And all you need to do to get rocket fuel is you just take the solid fuel, which you get from the scrap, combine it with some light oil you get from cracking the heavy oil from the ocean, and boom, you have all 3 components you need to launch rockets. So Fulgora is arguably the easiest planet, other than now V's, to make rocket parts on, because you just get so many of those extra resources. It's not even funny. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a drink for a second. I've been doing a lot of casting in the last 24 hours, so I think my voice is probably breaking a little bit. I should probably give it a break, but yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the actual Megabase. Now, you may have seen it before, but this is basically the Megabase, this entire rail network. And I've actually created separate stations for every single process, pretty much. There's no process which is kind of done on the same station. There's no shared stations like we had in Volcanus. Like, every single thing has its own station. And the number one reason for that is island size. Because, yeah, putting down foundations is a bit of a pain. Now, as you can see, I put down a bunch of foundations here because at the end I just sort of said screw it. I got foundations coming out the wazoo. I mean, my personal ship, how much it's got like 2,000 foundations just sitting in there. So I said, you know what, it's fine. But for the most part, I avoided using foundations where possible, but you still need them for, like, these things don't require foundations, but if you want to stretch power poles between the islands, the power poles will need foundations. So we'll start off by going through the process from start to finish. Now, as you can see, I've got two little stations here going to these little islands which have buttloads of scrap on them. And it's just a little 1-2 train. It comes in and it goes out. This one comes in and it goes out. And you do need a lot of scrap. I think I did the calculations here. And you need something like 16 belts of full scrap for a 5k SPM base, which is a ridiculous, ridiculous amount of scrap. And that's including the fact that our scrap recycling productivity is at 210%. So even including that, you still need 16 belts. Now, if you look closely, you'll only see 4 belts, but this is one of the few places where I do actually use stack inserters, because you can turn 16 belts into 4 belts, and a 1-2 train is more than enough to keep this belt fully saturated, so it is very awesome. And then we split it up into 4 individual belts and we send it down our recycler setup. Now, one of the things about the recycler setup is quite interesting. Now, if you look at these belts down here, you might be able to see that some things are stacked and some things aren't. So a stack inserter will always put the maximum amount of stacks on a belt. And in fact, what'll happen is it'll grab 16 items and then it'll put it down. Now, if we go back to NowVis, you might be able to actually see this. Maybe not, because I've got such a good base that it doesn't actually happen anymore, but yeah. What'll happen is if you, for example, this is agricultural science, if you have 15 signs in there, it'll pick up 15, and then it won't put it on the belt. It'll just sit there and wait until it gets the 16th, and once it's got the full stack, then it'll put it down, pretty much. Actually, I'm not sure. Maybe if it's got 4 or more, it'll put down 1 stack of 4, and then wait till it gets another multiplier of 4 or something like that. Maybe it waits for the full 16, maybe it waits for multiple of 4. The point is, it does not put half full stacks on the belt. Now, the recycler is different. The recycler will put half stacks down on the belt, which is very, very annoying. I'm missing a belt here. That's annoying. It's not a huge deal, but it is annoying. Now, originally I designed this belt for all of these output belts to be fully stacked, and then I realized that And that is why instead of having one recycling station, we have 4 recycling stations, because this guy was supposed to take in 4 fully stacked belts, but now it's only taken 1. And therefore, it's kind of working even if these are only partially stacked. Now, I want to dive into this a little bit more, because there's some very smart person in the chat who's right now saying, why don't you just use a stack inserter to output out of the recycler instead of using the default output port that just goes directly onto the belt? And for that, we are going to go back to our main base, because there's something I want to show you guys that I saw just before recording this video. We have this very, very interesting recycler right here. Okay? So it's currently stalled up. It hasn't output in a very long time because this belt is so stalled. But what's interesting about this guy is its contents. It has 200 copper wire and 11 iron gears. Okay? Now, you may be wondering, why is the recycler no longer running? And that is because the machine is actually being quite smart. It's quite smart, but the way it's being smart is it screws us over. When it takes scrap, it knows that there are 12 possible items that could be created from scrap. So if you go to one of these, it's just going to create all sorts. If you go, actually all, like this one, it creates a whole bunch of different things, and there's a total of 12. So it needs, that's why it's got 12 inventory slots, because scrap can create a total of 12. Now in this case, what it's doing is it's not working anymore because one of those slots, the copper wire, the copper cable is max stack size, 200. So we'd have to use another slot to start putting more copper cable, and obviously this next product that it's about to build is also copper cable. And it can't get rid of the copper cable because the belt is full. Now, stick with me for a sec here. If you have a stack inserter outputting from this, now, let's say it picks up the iron gear first, and I have no idea what sort of items it will pick up first. Will it pick up the one with the most amount? Will it pick up the item that's first on the list? I don't actually know, but I'm assuming for the purpose of this explanation, it will pick up the iron gear first. Now, if it always uses a full stack, and it requires a full stack, it'll pick up 11, it'll wait for the other 5 are not there. So you've got a stack inserter with 11 iron gears in it, waiting for 5 more iron gears that will never, ever appear, because the machine is backed up because there's 200 copper cables. So this machine is broken, and it is permanently broken. You could mitigate that by having 2 stack inserters outputting, but it could still perfectly break in that situation as well. Technically, you could have 8 stack inserters, and it could still theoretically break. Because of course you remember, when you stop using tech science, all these machines back up, and if copper cable backs up and it's the last cab off the rank, I don't think it's a coincidence that this is the last item. It just ended up being the last item, and then the machine just put out everything in the earlier items, and so you end up with this weird situation where copper cable is right at the end. So that could stall this machine. Now, the problem is every single machine on the entire line could theoretically stall in the same way. As soon as the entire line backs up, it could theoretically stall in the same way. Like, it just could. Now that's a question of how the stack inserters work. To be honest, I don't know much about how the stack inserters work in that particular thing. If there's multiple things to choose from, are they only ever going to choose the item that there are at least 16 of? Are they going to choose the first item off the rank? I just do not know. That might actually be worth a test. I know we're going a bit off script here, but I feel like this is worth a test. So what we're going to do... these are all blue belts. I'm going to replace this guy. Okay. So if we do this... Okay. That is a very good sign. That's an extremely good sign. Okay, let's wait for it to back up again. Let's in fact do that. That sent out way too much copper cable, but you could see the normal scrap recycling was sending off everything, and then it only went for the copper cable once it got through everything else. And we're going to let it fill up again. It'll fill up of iron gears first, I believe. In fact, this one's full of iron gears as well, so we'll just wait a little bit for this guy. He's going to fill up very quickly. And then we're going to see exactly what happens when we put a stack inserter down again. We kind of tested it already, but I just want to test again. If it pulls out the iron gears first, then it mitigates the problem. It doesn't completely absolve the problem, but it mitigates it. Okay, copper wire. I'm not sure why, because iron gears were higher, but yeah. Is that what I wanted it to do? Yes. Because potentially you could still have a stack inserter that was in the situation. It's very unlikely, but you could have a stack inserter that has like 2 holmium or something on it, and then it gets into this weird sort of state. I don't think it would ever happen. I really don't think it did, but it still worries me a little bit. But having said that, that would be something that if you wanted to do that for a full Megabase, using stack inserters, I think it's a lot more likely than I thought it was 10 minutes ago. Having said that, I did create 4 of these recyclers, and they output, doesn't matter what the stack size is. And basically, I just immediately recycle the gears because they're just too numerous to put on trains. And then everything else I set down on trains, and I got 2 layers of trains. The first layer is for the usable goods. These go off to the actual stations that do stuff for the science. And then they go down to these stations, and these stations are dump stations. So when the train has enough, like this one, it's got more than 4,000, which I think is how much it needs to fill up a full wagon. This station will activate, and a train will head over there, and we can actually jump in this train. And this train is just a very generic dump train. So it doesn't have a specific good. It goes to a dump station. It stays there until it's full, and then it goes away. And you'll notice legendary inserters everywhere. Train throughput is very important because you got dozens and dozens of trains flying around everywhere all over this base, especially at the dumping ground. You got trains coming in and out constantly because you got a lot of stuff being dumped. So getting the trains in and out of the stations extremely quickly is very important. So that is why I use legendary bulk inserters to unload all the trains and load all the trains. Get them really done quickly. Now this is our dumping ground, and as you can see, it is all bot based. I thought about doing it belt based, but considering like this was just for 120 SPM, and look at the mess that we got going off here. Look how backed up it is. It's a nightmare. So I decided to do it bot based. We got just under 5,000 bots here. We're only using about 1,500 of them. And I've set it up very effectively, I guess you could say. We got steel over here, right next to where we got iron, right next to where we got low density structures, then copper plate, copper wire, green circuits, red circuits, blue circuits. So it's laid out to be very economical so the bots don't use too much energy going in weird places. So there is a little bit of weird stuff. For example, concrete. We needed a bunch more concrete than I originally thought, so I got 4 full columns doing concrete. Plastic I forgot about, so it's all the way over here, and steel all the way over there as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I also got a nice little setup over here. It's producing rocket fuel because we launched the rockets nearby. Also do some very creative stuff here, using all of the resources from recycling. Basically just to make logistics robots. So this one, I started off with like 1,000 logistics robots, and then it just built up its own supply. Based on the goods it was meant to dump, it just started sending some of them over there to actually build robots, which I thought was quite cool. And we might as well go over here while we're here. This is the science station. So we've got 4 science trains, and they're basically just putting it in rockets, sending it off, and we get all of the blue circuits and the low density structures straight from here. So as soon as they're supposed to be dumped, they just end up in the rocket silos instead, up to a certain limit. You can see we've got a constraint here. Only if there's more than 5,000 LDS in the system will it start throwing them away, similar for blue circuits. Now, one very important thing to note about recycling is that different goods have different speeds. For example, steel is very slow. Each recycler with 4 speed 3 modules does 2.79 per second. Now we look at stone, it does 72 per second. You look at ice, it does 72 per second. And you look at, well, the holmium doesn't do that much, but I only got 2 here because we almost never throw away holmium ore. Technically we do have to. I'll explain that a little bit. But yeah, solid fuel is 82. 82 per second. And yeah, so that's basically the dumping area. It's self-refueling because of course we've got rocket fuel coming out our wazoo there. The rest of it, all the other stations, they all use a common refueling interrupt, which is actually down here. So we're making rocket fuel based off the a little bit of stuff we get off the recycling line. This makes the recycling station, and also the fuel for the scrap trains, which, yes, I've got so many scrap trains because, as I said, we use so much of this scrap. So I've got like 12 stations total, and I've got the circuit network hooked up to these rail signals. So only when it is less than 20k in these chests do the trains actually come in. And the reason I did this was because I used to have these chests on the 3 on the left being full, and this station was completely empty because the trains would always prefer to go into the closest station, which was these 3. So I had to start shutting them off when they had too much in there so that this station would get some love as well. I could have done that by constraining the chests, but I decided, you know what, let's do something fancy with the signals instead because that's a lot of fun. And I have my own Spidertrons on Fulgora because that's awesome. Now, the rest of the train network is very similar to Nowvis. We've got a group called FG Electrolyte, which consists of 3 trains. And they all go basically to electrolyte load and then electrolyte unload. Now, I believe there are 2 electrolyte unload stations. One for the science, and where's the other one? That's where we make the electrolyte. Do we? I thought we used it somewhere else as well. Here it is, superconductors. So superconductors require electrolyte as well, so we unload it here. So basically we got 3 trains, and they all go load, waiting, and unload And what that means is that if we look at this group, how do we look at this group? Electrolyte. So 2 of them sit at unload, and they sit there forever until they're basically empty. And then the 3rd train, as soon as it's free, it'll go to load, it'll finish loading, and then it'll go to the waiting bay. And the reason it goes to the waiting bay is because otherwise you end up with a deadlock. You have 3 trains, 1 in the loading bay, 2 in the unloading bays. The one in the loading bay is waiting for an unloading bay to open up. The ones in the unloading bay are waiting for a loading bay to open up. So it's deadlocks and none of the trains will move. But you do want 3 trains so that the instant a train leaves the unloading station, another full train immediately heads over to unload at their station as well. But the only way to do that is with a waiting area. So I got this huge waiting area over here. I got some miscellaneous trains which sort of have the same sort of logic. They basically go in here and just sit there and wait for the next station to for the next unload station to sort of need them. It's always full trains that go into the waiting area. And that's pretty much it. Now for this one I am using legendary prod modules for the science. Everything else just uses normal prod modules, but I could have upgraded them to... This is around the time I started to get legendary prod modules when I was building this base. So I used them for the science, but not much else. And the rest of it is just pretty straightforward. Just every component that you saw on our initial island has its own little station. This one makes electrolyte, and we got an unloading station for the holmium solution, unloading station for stone. Now, we got 4 trains with the stone unload, and we got 2 places where we need stone. One is the electrolyte, and the other is the holmium solution. And then we got 2 trains that load and then head to waiting. So 4 total, 2 unload. And technically we've got 4 load, because if you remember, this is actually the stone loading station, this guy right here, which just comes straight off the recycler. So a lot of trains go into these various loading stations. Now what you might notice here is that we've actually cut off the battery one. Now I said before that holmium ore was the least amount you get, was the thing that holds everything up. That is true for your first science base. Once you start putting prod 3 modules everywhere, batteries become the thing that you run out of the most. And you start actually producing excess holmium ore, which is quite incredible. But yeah, so that's why batteries don't have an extra belt, because when batteries back up, it means the entire base is backed up, and it means the recyclers will back up, and that is good, because you don't want the base just running forever. We do that on Gleba, but I don't want to do it here. So, we've got all these little setups with all these little trains, and each little train has a group. This one doesn't actually have a group. I think we've only got 1 train moving accumulators across. We didn't bother with a group. But for batteries, for example, we got 3 trains. They're all picking up batteries from the recycling stations, and they're all bringing them here. And since these are 111 trains, the rail network is very easy, but the throughput is a bit hard to sort of maintain. So for accumulators, we actually need a lot of batteries. You probably know that if you ever made accumulators. By the way, make them in an EM plant. Get 50% productivity on your accumulator production. It's so awesome. But anyway, we need like somewhere in the realm of 4 belts for this. That is why I've got 2 train input stations here. And in some other places, for example, where is it? This is where we create the holmium solution. We've got 2 output stations because we just need so much of this holmium solution sent around to random places. But that's pretty much it. We just got these little stations everywhere. We got this really cool little T intersection which I designed, and I tiled it. It's tileable. If you want to figure out how I made that, I went through the entire design process in a previous video. Just look for the holmium, the Fulgora Megabase video. I can't remember which episode it is, but I actually showed it being built on camera. So I'd probably recommend go checking that out. Apart from that, we got some little recycling things. Now, I've done it smart over here. Basically, we've got a train that takes in red circuits, sends them over here. They get recycled. The plastic gets put into a station. Everything else gets destroyed. You could try and be smart and say, well, I also need green circuits, so I'm going to get them both out. But then you kind of got one product coming in, two products coming out. And you got to do some very funky stuff, which I didn't want to do. I just wanted to keep it simple. Over here, we got copper cable into copper plate, which we do need for... I can't actually remember what we need copper plate for. Superconductors. Yes, superconductors require copper plate. So that's breaking that one down. And there's another one over here. So I'm just getting green circuits from blue circuits because that seemed like a really, really good idea. And I had a bunch of extra blue circuits because I don't really use them in the science. So yeah, this train just gets the blue circuits, dumps them in here. Anything that's not green circuits gets destroyed. Anything that is green circuits fills up this station. And these are used for... I don't actually remember. I think they're used only for one thing. But we'll watch this train and we'll see where it goes. But yes, legendary inserters. Even though these guys stack to 200, this is loading pretty fast. Now, I am only side loading all of the trains. I could be double loading them. But the thing is, space is at a premium on these islands. It's very, very hard to get a lot of space. And you don't want to be putting foundation down everywhere. So side loading is absolutely necessary because, yeah, you just don't want to use up too much space. And the throughput is enough. Usually, it's enough. Now, as you can see, there are some certain situations where I offload it on both sides because I need the throughput. And what is this one doing? Oh, this is the superconductors, the EM plants. So you can see it takes 4 electronic circuits per supercapacitor. So this is actually one situation where I offload on both sides. I think accumulators, I probably do the same thing for the batteries as well, offload on both sides. But for the vast majority, and especially for these recycling stations, it's a very, very snug little single-sided loading setup. But not so snug that I don't have the chest here. I still always have the chest, but other than that, it's pretty snug. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So we've got a couple of little stations that do recycling. We've got a lot of stations that do individual bits. And we got a lot of trains that do interesting things, like stone is needed in a couple of different places, ice is needed in a couple of different places. I've got the dinkiest little station somewhere. Not this one. This one takes the solution and makes the plate. Where is my dinky little station that I made? That's like barely requires being made. Here it is over here. So we need light oil for one process. So I basically just pump in heavy oil and I have to train over ice because we need ice to produce water, to do some cracking. This one chemical plant with 2 speed modules is enough to keep the entire 5K SPM base running. It's ridiculous how little of this light oil we need, but I still decided I just wanted to do it here, even though I think we only need it for one product. But that's just me being a bit pedantic. I could have made it on site here, and I could have just trained in ice and then got the heavy oil off the side and saved myself a whole station. But I said, you know what? I'm just going to do it there anyway. To hell with it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And that's pretty much it. That's Fulgora. That is Fulgora. It's very distributed, as you can see. Some things, we got quite a bit of space on the platform. Some of them, for example, the superconductors, used up pretty much all the space making this base. We could have squished the base a little bit, but a lot of the space is actually just the trains. Actually, the train stations takes up a surprising amount of space. So I tried to get it on islands where I could this station without using too many foundations. The recycling plants were obviously a pain. I earmarked this massive island for the dumping ground nice and early. I didn't build anything else there because I knew I wanted to have a massive station. As it turns out, we only probably need about 30 to 40% of those trains going continuously. Probably closer to 30%, but it's still nice to have them. So, yeah. And as you can see, if we go to the power network, we're using about 3.4 gigawatts for this base. And half of that is these EM plants. You put speed modules around them and you put prod modules in them, and they just use so much juice. It's like, well, if you look at it, 172, 1.8 gigawatt, that's like 10 megawatts per EM plant. And that's not even including the ones down here, which are not being speed moduled, or not being prod moduled. So these ones, if you go down here, that's 18 megawatts. And pretty much, well, this one is using legendary, but I don't think that actually impacts it at all. If we go out to here, yep, 18 megawatts. And you need a lot of these guys. So yes, 3.6 gigawatts. Let's just say the amount of accumulators we would have needed to use that with lightning would have been catastrophic. So that is why I set up Mr. Fusion over here. This produces 1.2 gigawatt per line, so that's a total of 6. And we just built in the fusion power cells all the way across using foundation, and they just get dumped in from a cargo landing pad, and we've got a special ship. It just goes back and forward between Aquilo and Fulgora, picks up some fusion power cells, grabs it, drops it down here. Pretty much all the planets have their own fusion fuel ship at this point. That all it does is it just grabs fusion fuel and then sends it back. And every single planet, including Nalvis, is running on fusion power. I don't use any other power in the entire solar system, except solar on ships. But in terms of planetary, it's all fusion at this point. So yeah, that's basically it. We've got the science, wherever it is over here. Got a single station. We got 4 trains, and the 4 trains just go up to this place up here. And they sit there and they launch their rockets whenever they are needed to. And I can't remember if I put some logic on these guys. I did do a train limit of 1 for obvious reasons. All of these, every station in this entire map has a train limit of 1 for very obvious reasons, but yeah. I think I did have a bit of problems with this one filling up this entire, this bottom station, and then the top 3 not getting enough. But I think I kind of ignored it, and eventually the tech science just backed up to such a huge degree that it kind of sorted itself out. But yes, if you were using tons of tech science, I mean, we have been researching tech science all the time we've been sitting here, but I must have had a pretty big cache on Nalvis because my Fulgora ships are just sitting here. This one's got 18k, this one's got 16k. I don't think they've come back yet to pick stuff up, but to be fair, when your labs have 50% resource drain and, what is it, 510% productivity, yeah, for the 40,000 science you had sitting in the cargo landing pad, it goes a long way. It's worth about 400,000 science in real actual scale. Which, I mean, this is still like 7.4 million, so we should have probably, maybe these guys have been running around and I just didn't notice them. Anyway, that's pretty much it for Fulgora science, and pretty much for Fulgora in general. there's not really much else to talk about here. Space is kind of cool for quality purposes, but we're going to have an own separate video for quality, so I won't talk about that at the moment. No enemies to speak of. The only real dangers on this planet is the lightning. When you go out here and you just sit there and you get struck by lightning and it can kill you. So the main problems with this thing are the islands are so small, so building space is at an absolute premium. And moving resources around, obviously you have to build train networks up in the air using extended platforms or enhanced platforms or whatever, they're elevated platforms and stuff like that. And obviously the recycling, because the recycling, it spits out 12 products and you do not want that belt to ever back up unless you really know what you're doing. Because if you don't know what you're doing, I mean, look, if we look at this ratio, right? 20% iron gear wheels. That's huge. You will spend a lot of time cursing because you have too many iron gear wheels in your system and the entire thing backs up. So do not skimp on the amount of recycling for your iron gear wheels. If we go over to here, that's why I'm not even putting them on a train. I just immediately cut them down using this. All of these recyclers here, all of these, all 4 of them, 48 recyclers, all of them with speed modules, all of them just for iron gears. It's overkill, but as I said, I originally designed this to take in 4 belts of fully stacked. And now it's only taken in 1 belt fully stacked because I didn't understand the recyclers properly. So these are definitely overbuilt, but on the other hand, you don't need raw iron gears for anything. So I'm just actually going to sit here. I want to get struck by lightning. Just so I can show you guys what it's like. I definitely will get struck by lightning, but that is when you're starting off, and I would definitely recommend before you get to Fulgora, get Power Armor Mark II and get some legs. Because the starting island that you usually start on is usually tiny. Like this is the island I started on. It was tiny. Originally I set up my cargo landing pad here. I built a little base and I gave up and I manually moved over here. But I had to trek over. I had to do many trips to move all my stuff over because the cargo landing pad had so much crap in it. It was a lot of moving and running around, and I got struck by lightning many times. I got killed a couple of times. Okay, my health is fairly low. It didn't go below half, but it did go fairly low. So you can survive 2 lightning strikes, but the 3rd one will kill you. So, yeah. So the first thing I'd recommend when you land on Fulgora is make a run to it. Find a big island and make a run to it. And set up there. Find a big island, like you start off here, that's terrible. What I should have done is I should have moved up to here. And this has a bit of scrap and set up my base here. I ended up moving over to here, which is even bigger. And it's close to another island, but yeah, definitely move to a bigger island with a lot of scrap on it. Build your base there. Do not try and build your base at the starting area. You will run out of space so fast it's not even funny. And you'll end up building barely any science because your base is so small. And you won't have enough room for accumulators. Do not underestimate the amount of land space you need to plonk down accumulators because you need way more accumulators than you think you need. And more even than that. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the Megabase. It does 5k SPM. It is awesome. Are my ships coming back? One of them's coming back. Okay, so we go over to Fulgora. We should see some rockets launching. There we go. Looks like all of them are going to be launching all at the same time. That's 16 rockets. That's 6,000 science. All being sent off at once. Which is awesome. So this one it's actually getting 17. I guess there might be some science in the old base or something like that. I don't know. But it's filling up like crazy. It's filling up really, really freaking fast. So I probably went overboard on the rockets. I could have easily just had 8 rockets here. And especially with this massive amount of speed modules, it would have been fine. But I chose to have 16 because that's what I chose to do. and there's no downside really. So, there we go. That is pretty much Fulgora. I'm not sure there's anything I really need to talk about anymore. What are our exports off Fulgora? Maybe we should talk about that. What do we get from Fulgora? Alright, so we get recyclers and electromagnetic plants. We also get holmium plate and superconductors. These are mainly sending over to Aquilo, because Aquilo uses all sorts of weird things from all sorts of weird planets. It uses tungsten plate and I think tungsten carbide as well, and he also uses some stuff from Glebar, so Aquilo. And yeah, quality modules I think use superconductors as well, so just like speed modules use tungsten carbide, so you will want to send some superconductors back to Nowvis for the purposes of making quality modules if you decide you want to make them. But they're not super necessary for a Megabase. However, if you want to start plonking down legendary prod modules or legendary inserters or legendary this or legendary that or blah blah blah, which I would recommend if you're going for 5k SPM. I mean, legendary prod modules are so good, especially when you put them in all of your biolabs and they just boost the productivity up by a huge amount. Yeah, at that point, quality modules are, well, they're 100% necessary if you want to make high quality goods. So yes, superconductors definitely need to be sent back to Nowvis, and I'm not actually sure why we're sending back. I don't think we're sending holmium plate back. Well, we are sending it back, but I'm not sure what we're using it for. Yeah, there's nothing it really used for on Nowvis, because you have to make these on Aquilo because it requires ammonia. They're kind of used for, but you just need to make one of those, so you don't need to worry about that too much. But it does have its uses. It does have very interesting uses. Okay, that's pretty much it for Fulgora, and my voice is 100% gone at this point, so I'm gonna have to give it a few. I was hoping to get all my quality, all my tutorial videos knocked off this weekend, but I don't think my voice is going to hold out, and I think I got 5 more videos to do, so might have to wait a few days before I get those knocked off. But anyway, we are done now. We have finished the video. That is Fulgora. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I do hope you will enjoy the next one as well. So thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you guys later.